يحتاجون إلى خارطة طريق.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Future Television. I'm Linda Tanim and these are today's top stories. The Israeli military announces the end to the Gaza truce as Israel and Hamas accuse each other of breaking the ceasefire that only lasted for a few hours. Future bloc leader MP Fuad Sanyura meets with Maronite Patriarch Shadarai in Kirki and reiterates the country's need of a strong president to overcome what he calls a deadly vacuum. And Lebanon prepares for the spread of Ebola in the wake of an outbreak of the deadly virus in West Africa of unprecedented severity. The Israeli military says a Gaza ceasefire that went into effect earlier today is now over and military operations are in progress on the ground. Dozens of Palestinians have been killed just hours into a ceasefire which only lasted a few hours after Israel and Hamas agreed to a 72-hour pause in fighting. Reports from a Rafah hospital say at least 40 people were killed as Israeli tanks fired shells into eastern Rafah. There was an immediate lull in fighting as the truce began at 8 a.m. local time. However, less than 3 hours later, medics reported deaths in the south of the Palestinian territory. Gunfire reportedly from snipers could be heard east of Gaza City. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has called the ceasefire a lull of opportunity and said it was imperative that the sides make their best efforts to find common ground. A U.S. delegation was due to arrive in Cairo for ceasefire negotiations involving warring parties, but Egypt told the Islamic Jihad the talks will be delayed after Israel revealed one of its soldiers may have been captured.
Then, as soon as the ceasefire is underway, tomorrow morning, I've talked to the Egyptian foreign minister tonight, Egypt will issue invitations to the parties to come to Cairo immediately in order to engage in serious and focused negotiations with Egypt to address the underlying causes of this conflict. And we hope and we expect both sides to raise all the topics of concern. The parties obviously need to find a way to address Israel's security concerns and to ensure that the people of Gaza can live in safety and in dignity. And for our part, the United States will be sending a small delegation to Cairo to assist and take part in these negotiations. As I said, this will last for 72 hours, 3 days, precious time. It is a lull of opportunity, a moment for the sides, the different factions to be able to come together with the State of Israel in an effort to try to address ways to find a sustainable ceasefire. And then obviously, ultimately, over a longer period of time, address the underlying issues. Let me also add that tomorrow morning the United States will also join in the effort to provide humanitarian assistance. President Obama has made available some $47 million to help ensure that some of the relief is able to come in. And many of our international partners have also made commitments over the course of the last weeks.
The UN's top rights and refugee officials have condemned Israel's bombardment of Gaza and warned of major humanitarian crisis. Navi Pillay, the UN Human Rights Commissioner, said Israel had attacked homes, schools, hospitals, and UN premises in apparent violation of the Geneva Conventions. UN's humanitarian aid coordinator Valerie Amos, meanwhile, told a UN Security Council meeting that there were now 440,000 displaced fleeing fighting in Gaza, and that hundreds of thousands more were without basic services, power and food.
With the blockade in place, most people are unable to leave Gaza, even to get urgent medical attention. So they come to United Nations facilities for protection when their homes and neighborhoods come under fire. More than 240,000 people. But over 103 UN facilities have come under attack, including an UNRWA school hosting over 3,300 displaced yesterday. 19 people were killed and over 100 injured. The United Nations has lost 7 staff, and other humanitarian workers have been killed since the outbreak of hostilities. The reality of Gaza today is that no place is safe. We urgently need the government of Israel, Hamas, and other militant groups to comply with their international legal obligations, including international humanitarian and human rights law. Each party must be held accountable to international standards, not the standards of the other party. We have all watched in horror the desperation of children, of civilians, as they have come under attack, with no safe place.
Working in strife-torn Gaza has exposed UN official Christopher Gunnis to the terror of a life lived in the constant shadow of war. But when artillery shells rained down on a UN school in refugee camp sheltering evacuees, killing children as they slept next to their parents on the floor, the unsurmountable horror of the situation suddenly overwhelmed him. Mr. Gunnis, senior director for the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, broke down sobbing during a live television interview with Al Jazeera as he described how shells had struck the Jalabia elementary school, girls' schools in the refugee camp in Gaza, killing about 20 people and wounding at least 100. Gunnis claimed the shelling came despite 17 warnings about the position of the shelter to the Israel Defense Force to ensure it would be spared.
The rights of Palestinians, even their children, are wholesale denied, and it's appalling. My pleasure.
For his part, Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah has criticized international inaction over Israel's offensive in Gaza, which he described as involving mass slaughter and war crimes against humanity, in a speech read out on his behalf on state television. He also slammed militants who he said were killing innocent people and mutilating their bodies in contravention of Islamic teachings, and called on the region's leaders and religious scholars to prevent Islam from being hijacked by militants. King Abdullah named no groups, but was apparently referring to violence in neighboring countries, including Iraq and Syria, where the Islamic State has captured swaths of territory, killing scores of people and forcing Christians to flee. And now for news in Lebanon, the head of the Future Bloc, Fouad Senyoura, says Lebanon needs a strong president that could find common ground between different groups. Following a meeting with Maronite Patriarch Bashar Rahi in Kirki, Senyoura said he told Rahi that the presidential void Lebanon had been experiencing since the end of the former President Michel Sleiman's term had resulted in a deadly vacuum. Senyoura called on March 8 parties to decide on one candidate so that a democratic contest could be conducted in Parliament. He said so far there are some who are disrupting the sessions, preventing the quorum from being met to elect a president. Both Rahi and Senyoura discussed the recent events in the region, criticizing the Islamic State's actions against Christians. The future official also touched on the ranks and salary scale, saying that there are serious risks posed by passing the scale and that the revenues to cover the hike were still being studied by MPs. Lebanese Army Commander General Jean Ahwaji has marked Army Day with a pledge to defend the country from all threats, while blaming the cancellation of the annual celebrations on the presidential vacuum. He said the presidential void also denied graduating officers the chance to receive celebratory swords, since the ceremony could only be organized under the patronage of the President of the Republic. Despite the lack of ceremony, Ahwaji stressed that the Army's anniversary will survive, pledging that the Army will keep the promise of defending Lebanon against all threatening dangers, whether internal or external. Meanwhile, Speaker Nabih Berri refuted reports that he and MP Walid Jumblat were pushing for the extension of Parliament's term. He said he had agreed with Jumblat to launch joint moves to break the presidential deadlock. Preparations are in place at Beirut's airport to combat the possible spread of Ebola in the wake of an outbreak of the deadly virus in West Africa of unprecedented severity. that has struck fear into the worldwide health community. Those with fever or symptoms are examined and sent to the Rafiq Hariri Hospital or the American University Hospital. The Health Ministry, coordinating with the World Health Organization, has distributed awareness-raising brochures and flyers to all passengers. Experts say the risk of in-flight transmission remains low, as Ebola isn't airborne disease but is spread via bodily fluids. The heightened measures comes as Nigeria's Lagos this week became the latest city to have a confirmed case of Ebola, which has claimed 729 lives in Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone and Nigeria since the outbreak began in February. Syrian warplanes have raided several areas on the outskirts of the eastern border town of Arsal. The national news agency says jet planes targeted the areas of Al-Ajram and Al-Zamrani. Ambulances rushed to the scenes to transfer those who were wounded to hospitals. And coming up next, a Sudanese woman who refused to recant her Christian faith in the face of a death sentence arrives in the United States. Stay tuned. Welcome back. And now for some news in brief. A magnitude 5.5 earthquake has hit the southeast of the Algerian capital, shaking buildings and sending panicked families rushing into the streets in Algiers and nearby towns. Algerian media say there were no immediate reports or damage of injuries, according to the Algerian state television. A Sudanese woman who refused to recant her Christian faith in the face of a death sentence has arrived in the United States, where she was welcomed first by the mayor of Philadelphia as a world freedom fighter and later by cheering supporters in New Hampshire. Mariam Ibrahim flew from Rome, where she had met with Pope Francis, to Philadelphia with her husband and 2 children, en route to Manchester, New Hampshire, where she and her husband have family and where they will make their new home. 14 people have been killed, including at least 10 government soldiers, in fighting overnight close to the crash site of downed Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 in Ukraine. More than 60 international experts, including Dutch and Australians, had reached the crash site to identify remains of the MH17 airliner and carry out an investigation into the crash. Multiple gas pipeline explosions have killed 24 people and injured 257 others in Taiwan's second city in what is said to be the worst gas explosion in recent decades. Roads collapsed and vehicles were blown up and then buried in debris. The first group of rescuers arriving at site said a series of explosions took place in less than 10 minutes. Witnesses say blast in Kaohsiung sent flames shooting 15 stories into the air, and entire blocks packed with shops and apartment buildings were set ablaze. Firefighters called to the neighborhood to investigate a gas leak were among the victims when the blast went off, impending at least 5 red fire trucks amid the rubble of pavement and dirt. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our top stories. The Israeli military announces the end to the Gaza truce as Israel and Hamas accuse each other of breaking the ceasefire that only lasted for a few hours. Future bloc leader MP Fouad Sanyoura meets with Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Rai in Kirki and reiterates the country's need of a strong president to overcome what he calls a deadly vacuum. Finally, Lebanon prepares for a spread of Ebola in the wake of an outbreak of the deadly virus in West Africa of unprecedented severity. Those are your top stories for today. I'm Linda Tamim, and I'll see you again tomorrow for more of the world's headlines. Take care.
اللبنانيون يحتاجون إلى خارطة طريق.